A year after the finale of Game of Thrones, I'm finally here with a couple low-tech PowerPoints and my own hot take. In my first video, I went through my rewrite of the end of the series. If you haven't watched that, I do recommend it before continuing with this one. The link is in the description. In this video, I will provide some rationales and what I was trying to fix. I have no intention of repeating every plot detail from my first video, but I do plan to explain my biggest changes, sometimes by plot point and sometimes by character. So, what went wrong? It's clear that the showrunners didn't know how to get to the story to hit all the plot beats that George R. R. Martin, or as I like to call him, Gur Martin, gave them. And I don't want to belabor what went wrong, but my view of their mistakes shaped my response and rewrite. So I will try to contextualize my changes as responding to one or more of the following: 1. Prioritizing visuals. 2. Plot armor. 3. Fan service. I get wanting to give Peter Dinklage a lot to do, but given the choice between a lot of a character I like executed poorly and less to do executed well, I'll choose the latter every time. 4. Shock value. And 5. Plot driving towards the destination instead of deriving from character, telling instead of showing. Now, I realize the last one is a big ask when you're given a few endpoints but not how to get there. Still, one of the strengths of A Song of Ice and Fire and the early seasons of the show is the internal consistency of the world building. Ned's death is shocking, but also makes terrible sense given what we know of his character and Joffrey's character. When I can see the showrunners maneuvering characters into position, it's a storytelling problem. So first, in my fix-it, I removed a bunch of plot points I didn't like. What's gone? First, Euron's fleet, or at least mostly so. I have Dany take her dragons and decimate the fleet early in Season 7, freeing Yara. Mostly I was frustrated with the character of Euron and didn't think the plot worked. It's like D&D wanted to give fans another over-the-top villain you love to hate in the vein of Joffrey or Ramsay, but I think they overlooked the most obvious choice for that role: Cersei herself. The Cersei I know from the early seasons would never have tolerated the way Euron talked to her. Plus, she wasn't given much to do in the final seasons of the show. Let her take up the story space that Euron occupied. Second, I feel like D&D didn't really know what to do with the Dorne subplot. I felt like the deaths of Myrcella and the Sand Snakes were played for shock and to tie off the storyline, and I thought the book's direction was so much more interesting. So, I have Ilaria and the Sand Snakes plotting to put Myrcella on the throne, and they never ally with Dany or get captured by Euron. Next, I'm not sure if Gur Martin told D&D that Viserion is going to become a zombie, or just that by the attack on King's Landing, Dany only has one dragon left. But I thought everything about the subplot to capture our White was stupid, and shame on them for having Tyrion come up with such a bad plan. The visual of Whites converging on the party is impressive, as is the shock value of Viserion being turned, but why the characters would follow such a plan is as improbable as the plot armor of Dany riding to the rescue just in time. Similarly, the scene in Season 7, Episode 4, of Jaime charging directly at Drogon, getting tackled by Bronn into the river to escape dragonfire, and both of them surviving, is probably one of the most egregious uses of plot armor in the whole show. This is part of the power and genius of Gur Martin. When a character faces impossible odds in his books, they don't make it. Jaime makes it because he's an important character, and important characters don't die in such a way. Now that's exactly the kind of fantasy trope Martin is working to subvert. Finally, some fan-favorite characters like Bronn really work best in small doses. There's no reason why the character of Bronn would fast travel to Winterfell, magically find Jaime and Tyrion, and blackmail them. Surely he, like I, would never trust a promise a Lannister made under duress. There's literally no purpose for him in the last couple seasons other than fan service, so he's gone. Just let him stay with his wife and his new wealth in Season 4 and fade naturally out of the story from there. So, how did removing these plot points affect the course of the ending? What did I replace them with and change? My whole ending really starts with how I wanted Season 6 to end. I wanted Sansa Stark to be crowned Queen in the North. There are a few reasons for this. First, I genuinely think, based on the world of the books, that being illegitimate would be a bigger hurdle than being female in terms of being the head of one's house. We see bastards in the books get nothing unless they're legitimized. Second, it makes sense for Lyanna Mormont to support Sansa. Lyanna is also a young female head of house. Undercutting a true-born daughter of Ned Stark would arguably undercut her own position. Third, I think it's interesting to not exactly repeat the chant that Robb got when he was crowned king in the North. So, this is similar to that scene without being quite so on the nose. Fourth, it gives Sansa's character more agency in the final seasons. Fifth, and this was what really appealed to me the most and what I annoyed all my friends by talking about throughout seasons 7 and 8. The War of the Five Kings, followed by the War of the Five Queens, is such a great parallel. Plus, I can totally imagine some maesters saying, well, Yara and Myrcella were really only claiming small territories, so the main players were Cersei, Sansa, and Daenerys. So it was really the War of the Five Kings followed by the War of the Three Queens. Academia is what I'm saying. But I think that's true of the fact that characters and world don't always agree about how to interpret events. Regardless, I think it makes for a more interesting narrative than Jon being king for 2 episodes than giving the claim away. Aside from that major change, what I mostly wanted from Sansa's character arc is for her to talk to her siblings. Otherwise, the tension between her and Jon or her and Arya is just so contrived. I was annoyed by the misdirect when Littlefinger was accused because it was both the Starks pulling a fast one on Littlefinger and the showrunners pulling a fast one on the audience. I think the suspense would have been so much more effective and smarter if we got to see the characters trying to outwit each other. And that doesn't happen when you withhold information from the audience for shock value. Finally, the characters make such a production in the final seasons of telling us how smart Sansa is. But how many times do we see characters taking action because of her insights? Why would she confront Dany about the fate of the North right before the big battle, when so much of Sansa's King's Landing storyline was about learning to pick her battles? When storyboarding, I think the showrunners should have written 3 things under Sansa's name: what she learned about how to run or not run a royal court when she was in King's Landing, what insight she has into Cersei's character, and what insight she has into Littlefinger's character. And then every action or bit of dialogue she gets in seasons 7 or 8 has to be consistent with those 3 pieces of insight. Sansa, you deserved better. In my version, I also restore and expand on the presence of the remaining direwolves, Ghost and Nymeria. Nymeria and many in her pack join Arya when she goes north to Winterfell. Ghost is simply much more visible throughout the episodes. D&D have said that the logistics of creating CGI direwolves was too expensive and too difficult to make look realistic. They've said that because everyone knows what dogs and wolves move like, it's harder to simulate than a fantastical creature like dragons. My side eye at that is because then just use dogs and camera tricks to make them look bigger. Sure, the audience, including me, would have made fun of dogs playing direwolves, but I for one would have preferred that to largely removing the direwolves from the show. Just look at this picture I found online with a man next to his 2 Malamutes. That would have been fine. And I think it's important to include the direwolves. They are the symbol of the Starks and of ice, to dragons being the symbol of Dany and of fire. It would also be helpful to have the wolves to come full circle. In season 1, the wolves are pups and the Stark children are all alive. At the end, there are only 2 wolves and 2 Stark children left to begin to rebuild. They are a reminder that after all the different struggles Sansa and Arya faced on their journeys, the pack is stronger together. Finally, their presence serves some plot purposes. Their presence helps facilitate Arya and Sansa reconciling. They walk at Sansa's side and reinforce her royalty to the people of the North. And when Sansa and Dany finally meet as competing queens, they both have creatures of power at their side. Now, let's talk about Arya. In the books, it's suggested that both Jon and Arya have some warg abilities. Arya, for example, frequently dreams of Nymeria. I really believe Sansa would have had the same ability if Lady had lived. So I want to use that and have Bran start teaching Arya how to use this skill. In the Stark's cat and mouse game with Littlefinger, Arya has to be careful about being seen with her sister, but she can ask Nymeria to protect Sansa and then see through Nymeria's eyes. I think it's a shame the show stopped using Arya's ability to wear faces after she kills the Freys. We spend so much time with her developing that skill, I want to see more payoff for it. So I have her use the ability several times: to kill Littlefinger, to be less obvious in the Battle of Winterfell, and to get close to the Night King by taking a walker's face. I know that she probably shouldn't be able to kill someone and immediately use their face, but this is the kind of plot hole I'm honestly okay with. I'll talk more about the battle in just a minute. I have Arya use another face to sneak around the castle in King's Landing, but as herself, she crosses another name off her list, the Mountain. Sorry, no fan service Clegane Bowl. Finally, in my version, she stays in Westeros at the end of the series, a trusted advisor and confidant of Sansa. I imagine she sometimes disappears from Winterfell for months at a time, and people plotting against Sansa tend to meet unfortunate ends. But the show itself won't go that far forward into the future. She helped kill the Night King and can find her own path. That's enough. I had several issues with the Battle of Winterfell. My initial notes for my rewrite just said, the battle is less stupid. The episode suffered from prioritizing visuals. The image of the Dothraki charging with flaming swords and then the lights going out was visually spectacular, but it doesn't really make sense when you think about it. The whole point of defending from the castle is to use it as a defense, not charge the undead on an open field. What could they have possibly accomplished? Also, if that was the end of the Dothraki, why are there so many of them in the episodes after the battle? I'll also note it doesn't seem like Jon could fight effectively on a dragon and wouldn't feel comfortable with dragon riding at this point. So I have them fighting and falling separately. More about Jon in a minute. Another problem with this episode was that the major characters had so much plot armor. We had specific shots of Jon, Sam, Jaime, and Brienne being overwhelmed by attackers. Yet I guess they all miraculously escaped somehow off camera? The battle should have definitely had a higher body count. Everyone in the world heard, the crypts are the safest place for the women and children, and thought, okay, so the dead are definitely going to rise within the crypt then. If we could think it, why couldn't the characters? Also, didn't Sansa order in the first episode for all civilians to learn some basic self-defense? So show her attempting to use those skills. Have them exhume the tombs and burn the ancient remains. Have an emotional moment when Sansa does so with Ned's remains. And then, in my version, some long-dead ancestors they didn't realize have become part of the floor and walls rise. A smaller number of whites, but still bringing the threat to those hiding in the crypt. Basically, a little literal army of unnamed extras dying does not have the emotional impact of seeing the death of a named character you care about. At least one top-tier character had to die in the battle. I had a few different versions of the list of characters who were going to die. Hopefully, my final version reduces the feeling of plot armor. Finally, D&D basically confirmed that Arya dealt the killing blow to the Night King for shock value. It sure was surprising, but in my view, it wasn't earned. A good twist is both surprising and inevitable. If it's only surprising, the logic of the development doesn't hold up. If it's only inevitable, it's boring and predictable. I don't mind Arya taking part, and I don't mind surprises. I mind when it's only a surprise, and the build-up doesn't go anywhere. So, let's talk a little more about the showdown with the Night King. In my version, Jon is special and was brought back from the dead for a reason. Arya uses her ability to take faces, and Bran has a part to play in defeating the Night King. My version is different enough that I will repeat it again here. Jon dies in the battle and is turned into a white through the power of the Night King. Arya is creeping towards the Night King's position, wearing a walker's face, when she sees Jon, his eyes supernaturally blue, raising his sword against a man he once commanded. Some small sound of horror and sorrow must escape her throat, because impossibly in the noise of the battle, he turns and faces her. Some kind of understanding passes between them, these two siblings who were always the closest to each other, even though one is disguised as the enemy, and the other should all rights be a shell, his mind and soul gone. They turn and stride side by side towards the Night King, the battle raging around them, yet not touching them. The Night King laughs when he sees Jon with blue eyes, but that laugh turns into a scream of fury when Jon thrusts his sword through the Night King's abdomen, pinning him to a tree. Bran reaches back through time to channel the power from the children of the forest, from the day they made the others. Arya removes the face of the walker and as herself stabs the Night King with the dragon glass. He shatters. This doesn't make all the others die in an instant, but now when killed they stay down and the dead stop rising. Jon's eyes turn from blue to their ordinary warm brown. He tries to speak but collapses. Arya takes a moment to stroke his hair and tell him it's okay, he can rest this time. He dies. Bran also seems badly injured, though they find no physical injury on him. He requests to be left in the Godswood. He sees many visions there. His mother, new to the north, crying. He sees Lyanna Stark, and stays with Maester Luwin while he dies. Later, when people return, Bran is gone. There is no body, and the face in the weirwood now seems to be his. What I like about this is that it suggests Jon is instrumental in saving the world, just not in the way anyone could have expected. Arya still gets a badass moment, but we get to see how she got there, and she uses a skill she's picked up along the way. Finally, even though I don't think my ending for Bran makes a ton of sense, I wanted his power as a three-eyed raven to have some kind of endgame in the battle. And I wanted Bran's ending to be as inscrutable as he had become, with a bit of mystery about it. Is he dead? Does he live on in some way in the Weirwood, an endless part of Winterfell? When the Queen in the North comes to the Godswood to reflect, does he hear her? At various points, as I thought about the Battle of Winterfell, Jaime, Brienne, and Tyrion were all on the list to die. This was largely to avoid plot armor. My general rule was, if your position is overrun, you die. I changed my mind for Jaime and Brienne because I'd already split up two popular couples by killing off Sam and Missandei. From a balance point of view, I felt like that was enough shipper pathos. So they both live, but they end up with different obligations, at least for a while. I would leave open the hope that they will reunite and find some kind of happily ever after in the future, but make it clear that it is a possibility, not a certainty. For Tyrion, I ended up deciding to gravely wound him and have him end up with losing an arm to post-battle infection. This was because I think just as many people would be wounded in the battle as would die, and I wanted to represent that. I have him named the new Lord of Casterly Rock after Jaime declines the position. Tyrion will have an uphill battle asserting his control, but he's a wily war hero. He'll figure it out. He'll marry a lady of noble house, regrettably cheat on her a lot, and will bend over backwards trying to give his two children with dwarfism all the same opportunities as his children of average height. Cersei. What a great villain. I mentioned this before, but I wanted Cersei to step fully into the role of tyrant and villain. Since the subplot with capturing the White is gone, I needed a new way to propose the temporary ceasefire to fight the dead. I like Cersei being the one to suggest it, of course never planning to follow through, because it buys her time to hire the Golden Company and get the elephants the show denied us. Finally, there was the matter of her death. I felt like the rocks fall, everyone dies in the show was generally dissatisfying. Now, I don't think major characters by default get meaningful or, quote, just deaths. Death can be random. So I considered different options, and some, like the show's version, just didn't seem to do her storyline justice. Others felt a little too neat or convenient. Would Jaime really be able to get into the castle and find her so easily? Would she really be his top priority at this moment? In the end, I had her face down Dany, surrounded by human shields, including a child she's literally forcing to stay on her lap. When Dany creates an opening, the child's parents rush forward and kill her. I think this has an element of justice in that she has treated her subjects so badly throughout the show, and it finally comes back to bite her. And I felt like the father could himself be the youngest of several siblings, so in a sideways way, her death at the hands of the younger brother prophecy could still kind of come true if you squint. I think also the show in later seasons seemed a bit more hesitant about showing the deaths and bodies of female characters. They tended to die prettier deaths, like by arrow, or die off screen, like Olenna. Obviously, this isn't always true, but I think it is a tendency. So show Cersei's death. Create symmetry with the end of season 1 by starting the final episode showing her head on a pike on the city walls, like Ned's. Let her character arc end with a bang, not a whimper. Oh, Dany. I also struggled with how to end her storyline. My handling of the Battle of Winterfell meant that Jon was not around either to threaten her claim or to kill her. I definitely could see the trajectory of her breaking due to her losses, and she certainly could be brutal and cold, but she didn't really seem dramatically more so than the other powerful houses. So I continue to find new ways to pile on her losses. Viserion doesn't become a white, but he dies when Dany attacks the food supply. Rhaegal doesn't get shot through the neck by Euron, but dies during the Battle of Winterfell. Missandei doesn't get captured by Cersei. How did that happen anyway? But she dies at the Battle of Winterfell. Jon, as we've discussed, also dies during the battle, and Grey Worm dies while attacking King's Landing. So when she's standing over Cersei's body, finally victorious, and then Drogon kills innocent civilians in the crowd, yes, she snaps. But how does she snap? That is the question. I considered having her mount Drogon and fly him west, since Arya is no longer playing explorer, but that seemed like kind of a cop-out. It occurred to me that the language of motherhood is used with Dany both in relation to her dragons and in relation to her subjects, so both are her children. But Drogon is not a tame creature or a slave to be commanded, and the Targaryens who ruled with dragons didn't care about the people or livestock they killed, but Dany has shown she does care about those things. In my version, she realizes she has to choose between her children, and the decision she makes is moral for the people, but also immoral, because she has betrayed a creature that loves and trusts her. When she drives a sword into Drogon's eye, her mind breaks and she becomes immobile, unable to speak. The lords of Westeros would certainly prefer to execute her or arrange an accident to befall her, but at the same time, she's not realistically a threat to them now, and Tyrion speaks persuasively against it. So she is kept under guard in a luxurious prison and left to dance with her ghosts. She is a tragic figure, and more so as the years go by. Imagine the songs and stories about her, and how in a few generations they will pass into legend. My version ends with Westeros split into smaller kingdoms. Remember, as far as the characters know, they're at the beginning of a long winter, and they've all suffered terrible losses. Perhaps a charismatic ruler will rise and be able to conquer and reunite the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps a child of Sansa's will marry a child of Tyrion's, finally bringing together the Stark and Lannister alliance, and that child will have the backing of enough houses to make a claim to the throne. I think it's out of scope for the show to make any claim with certainty about how the future will turn out. So this is how my version ends. As Sansa Stark and her army depart the broken city of King's Landing, Arya sees a bit of green emerging from the snow. It seems impossible that a winter could be so short, but they speculate the Night King had made winters unnaturally long. They look at each other, and it's clear they're both thinking of their family's motto. But without saying the words, they turn their horses' heads north. The Iron Throne sits empty, the room dark. The last shot of the show is of Nymeria and then Ghost trotting after them. So, those are my reasons. If you're curious about a plot change I didn't cover or why I left something unchanged, please feel free to ask away in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.